Hi, welcome to Chat Communications Happenings and Trends. Today we are speaking with Bill Cimbrelo. He is running for Massachusetts 9th District in Cape Cod. So Bill, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. It's great that you're here. So first off, let's learn about you a little bit. Why did you decide to run?
Well, I've been taking a good hard look at what's been happening in Washington here for many number of years, and really back in 2007, 2008, when we had the Great Recession, we looked at what happened there, and our government bailed out the banks and the automobile industry instead of the homeowners.
Yeah.
And at one time, I'm to understand that there was a debate that they would, in fact, bail out the homeowners, which in turn would, of course, bail out the banks, right? But that was not to be the case, and instead, the corporations were the ones that were favored there, and Americans, in many cases, were hung out to dry. And of course, there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of foreclosures, and people left in the street or in shelters in many cases. So, the light bulb went off in my head there, saying, what is government? Who is government representing? And I got involved much more so. I'd always been in tune with politics to a point, but I got much more involved at that point, to the extent that I ran for Senate in 2011, 2012 against Republican Scott Brown here in the state of Massachusetts. I did not secure enough signatures to get on the ballot at that time. It's 10,000 signatures for Senate. It's 1/4 of that, well, 1/5 of that actually for a House seat. But at any rate, I decided to stay in as a write-in candidate, and really kind of took the process through to the end. Elizabeth Warren won that election, making a lot of people happy, of course. But my background, I came here from Buenos Aires, Argentina, when I was just shy of 6 years old. And, we came here through New York City by a cargo ship, sailed past the Statue of Liberty, and went through a very emotional time seeing all of that, and then settled in New Jersey for a time, for about 6 years, and then moved to Massachusetts. Now, in that 6 years' time, my parents, through a lot of hard work, frankly, did manage to buy their first home. And that was only after 6 years being new to the United States of America. Today, we've got graduates graduating from college with degrees after their name, who would be hard pressed to be able to purchase a home, and that's a big ball and chain on the economy to the tune of $1.5 trillion. So,
you're talking specifically about the student loan debt.
Student loan debt, I am, and right now we have a very regressive economy. If you look at what's happening with income inequality, the inability of these graduates, and in some cases we're not talking kids here, we're talking adults, and in some cases that $1.5 trillion debt, 68 million of that is folks that are over 60 years old. So it's a big drag on the economy. A few days ago, Washington Post came out with an op-ed in the Washington Post saying it's time to forgive those loans because of all the impact it's having on the economy. So, basically, the status quo got us here, okay? And that's why I'm running. I feel that the status quo is, in large part, what's delivered Trump. We have a Democratic Party establishment that, in large part, abandoned its base. If you think about it, it's been working largely for corporate and special interests, instead of really responding to the interests of we the people. And if you think back, the proof is all around us. If they did work for us, and the times that we've had Democrats in control of the Senate and the White House, we would already have single-payer health care.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
we wouldn't have homeless people laying in the street or under overpasses or in alleyways. These things would not be who we are, but yet that's where we've come to. And I'm fighting for that and many other things.
So I read an article recently stating specifically about candidates that are running to the left of currently established Democrats. But mixed within there, it was an interesting article. It didn't really describe you very much, but it did describe Republicans in the same article. Do you consider yourself running to the left, or from the left of who's currently in office?
Absolutely, unquestionably so. And particularly the incumbent, Rep. Keating, his voting record, he's what some would call a Dino or Dino, depending on how you pronounce it, Democrat in name only, who is a centrist and a right-leaning centrist, is projected to vote with Trump 43% of the time. He has supported the surveillance state, voted in favor of expanding and continuing the Patriot Act on every occasion except one. He had an opportunity to support the Dreamers recently when the budget came up again, and instead he elected to group himself with Republicans and let that go by the board. About 3 weeks ago, he co-sponsored a bill that actually would further modernize our nuclear sub-capability. We have 7,000 nuclear warheads in this country right now. Do we need more deterrent? I don't think so. I certainly don't think we need more military spending. I don't think we need to be in 150 countries. Again, about a week or so ago, he co-sponsored to expand, or I think he actually wrote the bill to expand our military presence in North Africa. He's got a history of being a war hawk. I certainly do not go by any of that. I think we should not be empire building as it is.
Well, some would argue that stance would be more isolationist. Do you take a more isolationist stance on empire and empire spreading and building, or do you consider it being more responsible or fiscally conservative?
I don't consider it. I think there's a clear distinction between empire building and economic reforms that are global. What President Trump is doing right now with tariffs is going to have ramifications around the world, and we're already seeing it here. So when I talk about empire building, I'm not talking about the economics of goods and services going back and forth between countries. That's all good. We need to do that. We need to do things that are going to empower people not only here but around the world. We can't have corporate America chasing the lowest common denominator around the world. And I have a personal history where I saw that happen. And I have a background in chemistry. I worked in the service of the printed circuit industry. And eventually I worked my way over to the wastewater treatment of that industry, removing heavy metals from the discharge water from these factories. And in some cases designing closed loop systems where there was no water being discharged, but water was actually recycled. The point being is that industry is 1/10 the size that it was when I first got out of college and servicing that industry. And what happened with that industry is it all went out to the Pacific Rim because the labor rates were considerably cheaper there, and they weren't enforcing EPA guidelines. So if you go look at now the National Geographic special showing the rivers and lakes and ponds with the dead fish floating, we've got heavy metal toxic waste in the soil, and we've got air that's not breathable. Again, corporate America, is chasing the lowest common denominator here. They don't care about anything but profits, and even the well-being of humanity and the planet seems to be take a second seat. Second position.
What's your position on campaign finance?
Well, we need to take a serious look at campaign finance reform. I would support any measure that would limit and or eliminate monies coming in from lobbyists and special interests. I think getting back to that empire building, I think that goes hand in hand with that. We're the reason we have expanded, the reason we have seven undeclared boards in this country is exactly because we've got the military-industrial complex heavily lobbying Congress to have projects in the various states around the country. We have to work towards correcting that. Citizens United is an atrocity that has basically put what I would call legal corruption on steroids here. And we need to have some serious look at campaign finance reform. We need to look at leveling the playing field. I'm for ranked choice voting. If we can make that happen, it's happened here in Maine, and I'd like to see it expand here around the country.
So since you are in favor of at least taking a look at Citizens United, would you be in favor of maybe supporting a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United?
Absolutely. I don't know what until and unless we have enough what I call the progressive beachhead that needs to get into Congress. I don't know that we'd have the votes to make something like that happen. And that's why I feel that every election, every midterm, every general election that goes by, House of Representatives, those people are up for election every 2 years. Okay. Yet we have a 95% reelection rate of people that are just represent the status quo. And I know a lot of people don't have their head around that. So the only way we're going to change things is by changing the people that brought us here. And the people that are already in there at the top of the hill, literally, they don't want things to change. They like the idea of picking up the phone and calling Raytheon and saying, hey, I'm running for office, and getting a $10,000 check from that group. Whereas people like myself who are running a grassroots campaign, you saw what Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez has accomplished here in Queens, New York. These are grassroots campaigns. We're working on small dollar donations, and that's the way we have to take this country forward. And I can't, in all honesty, in all candor, say to somebody that if I'm taking a big donation from the fossil fuel industry, like my opponent, for example, or the pharmaceutical industry, how can I look you in the face as I go off to Washington and say, don't worry, when I get there, I am going to represent your interests instead of these other interests? It's disingenuous. So absolutely. But in order for that to happen, people really have to get engaged in the electoral process and realize that every 2 years we have an opportunity to wipe the slate clean if we so desired, and get people in there that are actually going to work for us. And that's the only way it's going to happen.
I think it's amazing that we have something like a 12 or 13% approval rate of our federal Congress, and yet they keep getting reelected to these positions. I mean, if I had a 12 or 13% approval rate at my job, I'd be gone tomorrow or today even. So it's remarkable. Yes, all of us would be. They're the only people that pretty much can't get fired for doing anything. Let's move on to immigration. So now we are having, or we're seeing a ramp up of, I guess, anti-immigration or anti-immigrant stances in the country through unofficial or official policy, with the whole child internment camps, or taking away children from their parents, even the parents seeking asylum, imprisoning people seeking asylum. What is your stance on immigration, period?
Well, as I said in the beginning, I'm an immigrant. My parents, of course, were immigrants. My wife is an immigrant, and so we know the immigrant process and what it entails. If you've come to this country from elsewhere, you know that process is a very invasive process. The questionnaire involves a lot of questions that I think people natively born might have some pullback on it. We have to have a system here that is moral and just, that allows people to come into this country if they want to seek asylum. We have asylum seekers for political reasons, as well as where they've been have been physically attacked, and there's generally good reasons for people to have come to America and want to stay here in America. And we need a working process that will allow them to stay. That we cannot, as this administration has done now, instead of taking immigrants out of the shadow, it's forced them deeper underground. And that's a crisis. And certainly we have the situation where these children have been separated from their parents. That is, to me, an international embarrassment. I worry that an American family may be traveling abroad and somebody takes it upon themselves to do tit for tat and takes someone's children away. We're just going down a very, very dangerous path here as a nation. The Dreamer Act has been ignored. This was a executive order signed by former President Barack Obama that should have been honored. And here again, President Trump has elected to pretty much throw everything under the bus, and I think it's a grave mistake. What he's done is he's really ramped up bigotry and racism in this country, and the separation, and people are now distrustful, much more distrustful of each other with an accent, or they have a different color skin than you or whatever. Then all of a sudden they're suspect. We can't create the nation. We can't keep going down this path that we're going to, because it's really towards our ruination.
What would you do if elected to try to reverse any of these current policies that are in place?
Well, again, we need a procedure that's going to take these people in. First and foremost, we're not going to be able to do anything until we've reestablished trust. And I don't see how that can happen with the gentleman that's in the White House right now, frankly. So my taking office, if that happens by 2019, which would be the swearing in, I don't see us moving greatly forward on immigration reform until he is out of there. We can stop what's happening with a majority of Democrats if we can have a veto-proof House, and it would be a delight, obviously, if we could have a veto-proof Senate and pretty much stop him in his tracks. But as far as moving forward, we've got to, at this point, allay the fears of that community, and we have to come up with a process that's going to first get them out of the shadows again, start that process, certainly honor the Dreamers, start them getting registered into a process, a delineated path towards citizenship. There has to be a method. Of course, we need to do background checks on these people. I mean, we can't just arbitrarily say, okay, you're here, it's a done deal. There has to be a background check and fairness. And everyone that comes to this country that's gone through the process legally, we've all gone through a background check. And that has to be part of the process. There also has to be a payment process. The process itself of doing the N700 or the N400 form, that's an expensive form. I think it's like $700 just to do the form now, or something like that, or $500. It's gone up. But one of the things that I would legislate against is there's predatory lawyers out there that are taking advantage of the immigrant community, charging in some cases $10,000 just to complete the form. And all they're doing is instilling fear in the process and distrust in a process that's already very emotional. And so I would make that predatory lawyering, if you will, or however you want to describe it, I would make that illegal and punishable by a substantial fine. And we've got to have a process that's clean. One of the things that I've mentioned in the past is a biometric identity card, and all immigrants coming into this country, it's what we all used to call the green card. The green card isn't green anymore; it's a biometric card, and we need to make sure that gets used and employed properly.
What is a biometric card?
Basically, it has data the individual, the person's photograph, they're fingerprinted, and all that information is actually ingrained into the card. So it's essentially impossible to forge that identity. And every single immigrant that is in the process of going through becoming a naturalized citizen or even coming to this country has a card similar to that.
So they're currently using that in
Yeah.
place of the green card? Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's technically still called a green card, but I don't think there's anything green about it.
So you talked about that form. Not only that attorneys are charging thousands of dollars to actually complete a form that essentially costs a few $100s, but even putting that type of money, like $500, $700 on a form, seems like it's still economic based entry, right?
Yeah, you're right. But let me ask you a question, and I'm not, two wrongs don't make a right. But if you go into a community, let's say that you want to if you wanted to build in a community and you wanted to build a house in a community, when you go in and you see residential zoning laws that say you can only build on a 3-acre lot with a 3,000 square foot house, is that not doing the same thing?
If I go to build a house on a 3-acre lot,
if your income is limited, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you can only afford a 1-acre lot on a 1,500 square foot house, that's limiting your abilities to go in that town by zoning.
Right.
Okay. This in some respects is no different. We can't, I don't think we can say, okay, it's free. I think what you have to do is you have to make a repayment method for the process. And as we integrate,
so they have to basically go into debt to do that.
I think it has, you have to be fair to the people that have come here and done it correctly. I just don't think you can just, I'm not for a blanket amnesty in that sense. I think we need to have a process, okay? And the process has to be fair. It has to be fair to everyone. And that would be my proposition.
Would you not believe that by making something like that free would help prevent people from trying to enter the country illegally that have absolutely nothing to, like, dollars wise, has no money, impoverished, poor? Would that not be something that would help free up them to, or allow them to actually fill out the form and thereby doing the entry process legally?
I hear where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from, but at the end of the day, there needs to be I believe, a process that has some accountability for all the stages that have to happen. And the amount of money that we're talking about, granted, what you're talking about, to some people is a lot of money, but if they've managed to, in many cases, at least get to our shore, there is some kind of money behind them somewhere along the way. And if they're, in many cases, I'm saying, they're paying these ridiculous fees to attorneys, again, some way, somehow, they're finding the way to do that. And again, the objective here is to get them, for lack of a better word, assimilated into society so that they are working, productive, and part of society.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can kind of see the perspective, but if they aren't going to be paying these attorney fees, they could actually use that money that they were investing there into settling into the States, finding a job, and actually thereby contributing to the American economy in that sense.
Well, one of the things that I would help help along the way is have, for example, like immigrant type community centers that people can go in and get potentially free help to do the form. Okay, it's the form itself is tedious. There's no trick questions. It's just a very tedious, long, personal questionnaire. Obviously, we're going to need people that have of many different languages, right? And the form is available in different languages. So, and I'm all for that. I'm not trying to create a barrier, but I have to. If we're going to create a law, here's the thing, Amanda. If we're going to pass a law in Congress that we're going to get everybody to say yes, I'm good with it. The problem I hear and see is the folks that have made it here, and I'm not necessarily in that group, but I just know there's a lot of people that are going to say there's going to be pushback. I paid $4,000 to get into this country. Why should somebody else get in here for free? And that's
it's the same thing with college, right? I paid $100,000 for my college education. Why should anyone get it for free that's behind me?
It's a valid point. It's a little different in that we're talking a $1.5 trillion nut that's impacting the economy in a different way. But in order to get that kind of legislation through Congress, we're going to need something that's got some teeth to it to make it. And I don't like the idea of the what was there some talk about one point about immigrants coming in here and doing a touchback to their own country and then trying to come back. No, that's ridiculous. I'm not for that at all. Once you're here, you're here. Let's make it work.
What would you do about currently standing facilities that are being used to, I guess, imprison current immigrants that have come in or are undocumented asylum seeking? Would you advocate for some other system like bracelet monitoring and things like that, or would you retain those currently existing facilities that are owned and operating by private corporations?
Yeah. So first of all, I've come out publicly for abolishing ICE. I don't think we need, basically Hitler Youth running around the country here, yanking people out of their homes and work and all that kind of thing. I find it tremendously objectionable that is happening. I would certainly, it just goes against every grain in my body to see these kids yanked away from their parents and end up in cages or whatever, whatever their housing situation is. So, yes, I mean, to the extent that we could do, GPS location bracelets or any kind of, or anklets or whatever, any and all of that is better than what's being done right now. And we've got a situation here in Massachusetts where there are 3 counties, Bristol County, Plymouth County, and Barnstable County, of which 2 of those counties are in my district, where the sheriffs have been deputized by ICE to apprehend and incarcerate anyone that they identify as potentially a undocumented immigrant. So that's a problem. We got close here in May where the state Senate tried to vote that down and basically nullify 287G, which is the law that allows ICE to pull that nonsense. And it fell apart. And we have a Republican governor here who would have never signed it unless we had a veto-proof a vote on it. And it's not going to happen until we replace this governor and until we, I think, replace this president. But I'm absolutely in favor of abolishing ICE. Now, ICE is immigration, customs, and enforcement. I believe that we should retain the custom and enforcement part of it under Homeland Security. But ICE is only 15 years old. It hasn't been here for forever. All of a sudden, we decided that was an important thing. And
yeah, I agree. I was actually going to ask you about that, considering that it's definitely a movement right now. At any rate, it's been a movement on the far left for a year or two, actually, but it's now become a lot more mainstream. Right. Okay, so recently, Republican Representative Dan Donovan introduced the Unmasking Antifa Act of 2018. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Okay, so what this act is designed to do is basically to imprison or potentially imprison somebody for up to 15 years, people that have come to protest wearing masks or scarves on their face, specifically targeting, obviously, Antifa, as the name suggests. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, this is the first I'm hearing of that. I know that there was a protester that was in the Dakotas here that just got a pretty substantial sentence too, which I don't understand that either. I don't know how that relates or doesn't, but you know, I have a problem with it. I mean, to me, if you're wearing a mask, I mean, doesn't that mean that if you're forced to not wear a mask, is that not violating your freedom of expression? Is it, you know, here are the Supreme Court saying that that speech is, that money is speech, but somehow wearing a mask isn't. I mean, I don't know. You know, it's how different is it from wearing a T-shirt that has a statement? I don't think it is. I hope if that's I hope that doesn't pass. Where is that in the process?
I think it's just been introduced.
Yeah.
So it hasn't moved too much yet, but there's but it very well could, because it's got a lot of Republican support right now. Of course, we have a long history of people wearing masks in the United States and masks in protests, specifically hooded masks. With the KKK that you see. And this was never a thing prior to the Antifa movement, although Antifa has been around for years. It cropped up in Germany to oppose Nazism. And so it's been around for a long time. But yeah, it's ridiculous. I think I would completely oppose this personally. And as you just suggested, yes, I think it is a violation of speech, because if people can wear T-shirts and all sorts of things, it would seem like a mask wouldn't be that much different than a way to express oneself. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned a lot of pretty progressive, prominent issues: healthcare, student loan debt, and a Green New Deal or something along those lines. What would be the first thing that you would try to tackle if elected to Congress?
I think single-payer health care probably impacts the greatest part of the country in a single sweep. And to me, single-payer health care or expanded Medicare for all, depending on how you want to paint it. My version of it includes dental care, includes vision care, and includes mental care. And I think if we have an affordable system of health for this country, we start to, there's an immediate payback, right? Because diseases that aren't being treated end up costing more to the individual, and in some cases costing a life. We've got, I've seen numbers anywhere from 40 to 130,000 people a year dying from either under treatment or no treatment because they can't afford it. And that needs to stop. And we've got here particularly bad opioid epidemic here on the Cape and in this district. And I think that's true of much of the country. And we need a good mental health system that will address that properly. At the same token, not punish chronic pain sufferers, because there's a very careful balance that has to be struck there between. We've all heard the stories where over and over again where somebody comes out and has had major surgery, and now the doctors are so worried that here's a bottle of ibuprofen. I mean, it's just gotten to that point, and so we need to strike a balance that is correct for all concerned. And I think single-payer healthcare solves a lot of problems. for in a lot of different ways. And I also think that if I can expand on that, we're the richest economy in the world. But yet you can walk down any street corner in any major city, and you can see people laying in the streets, in alleyways, under overpasses. There's over 500,000 people that consider themselves homeless, individuals and families that are homeless in this country, and that's a crime. And so one of the things that I would want to pass, if elected, is a right to housing bill that would eliminate entirely forever, any kind of homelessness in this country. And that process in and of itself would create zones of empowerment, and it would also create millions of jobs, both white collar and blue collar jobs. And I think we need to move in that direction as well.
So speaking of work and job creation, what is your stance on workers' rights? Because right now we've seen attacks on workers' rights, whether it's on people that, whether it's the Supreme Court decision that was the recent Supreme Court decision to assure that people in the public sectors, unions are no longer paid for or mandatory to pay for, which
fees,
right,
union fees, yeah.
Even though they could still claim union representation if needed. So what is your stance on that?
Well, it's an unfortunate thing. Income inequality is, if you go back far enough, income inequality is at the root of everything that's wrong with our country, I believe. And are you hearing me okay? Okay. It looked like you weren't. And so I think that what unions have done for our nation is they've tried to level the playing field wherever and whenever they could. And the erosion of organized labor right now is really taking the country backwards at a time when we need stronger unions more than ever before. And I'm not only for organized labor in that regard for existing unions, but I would favor legislation that would promote worker-owned cooperatives and create, zones of commerce. And one of the areas that I would strengthen that is in the lending area, because banks are very reluctant to loan to worker-owned cooperatives. They really want to have, one or two principals that they're dealing with in a situation. They don't want to necessarily lend to 10 people, because then they don't, if there's an issue with a loan, they don't want to be chasing 10 people instead of one or two. But we need legislation that's going to provide funding. To the extent that we can, we have to be empowering people, lifting them up, and not doing things that when they're finally at the verge of lifting up, saying, "Oh no, you've gone too far. Now we're going to cut your benefits," which is what we do now, right? People are maybe on some sort of a social benefit of one form or another, and they've got guidelines. You can only make this amount of money. If you make any more of that money, A, we're going to cut your benefits. B, if you don't report that you've exceeded that, we're going to cut your benefits. So people are stuck. The system's broken. And so we need a system that acknowledges that there's got to be a transition point to get from A to Z, and that there's got to be stepping stones that allow people to get there.
On your website, I don't see that you've mentioned criminal justice and potential criminal justice reform. Do you have a stance on that?
There's a ton of stuff that isn't on my website. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have, a high school to prison system right now in many respects for people of color and the people of poverty. We've made poverty a crime in this country in many situations, and these people there's some cases we have generational poverty. And again, I'm all about empowerment. We have a judicial system that court-appointed attorneys are overworked, understaffed, and underpaid. And that's a problem. We have a system where even though the Lady Justice sits on the judge's bench, she's got one eye on how much money the defendant has in his wallet. or her wallet. And justice can't work that way. And we need to have a system that, there's how many people are in jail right now on marijuana misdemeanors of one form or another? It's ridiculous. Yeah. So, we need to be able to go back. I'm 1,000% against profit prisons for profit. There, we don't have any here in the state of Massachusetts, which I'm glad of. And I think they should be outlawed. I think that there are actually instances where people in law enforcement, even prosecutors, were getting a piece of the action, if you will, when people were being sent to these private prisons. So that needs to be outlawed. The system needs to be overhauled from top to bottom.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention as far as your campaign's concerned? What you want to accomplish in Congress? Anything along those lines?
Sure. One of the things that we hear the Democratic Party always talking about, they want to make sure that Social Security, for example, is properly funded and well indexed, and it isn't privatized, and all those things. I know that you're a proponent of modern monetary theory here. Is that correct? Yourself?
That's correct.
That. Right. So, as you may know, I do as well, and I'm a strong proponent of it. So when Congress is sitting there saying, we've got to make sure that Social Security is properly funded, we know that that's a red herring, because it can never be not properly funded, because all that has to happen is Congress says, hey, let's allocate X number of $1 billion into the Social Security fund, and they send a message over to the Fed, move a few ones and zeros into the Social Security Administration, and it's a done deal. So when you look at that, that's one thing. The other thing that's happening is the incumbent here, for example, is saying to him he's going to defend and protect Social Security. On the other hand, he says nothing about getting rid of this $1.5 trillion debt that I know from experience going around to my constituents, that parents and grandparents of these college grads have picked up the ball in many cases when their own kids cannot, because they can't find suitable employment. So basically, here he is. He's giving them $5 in their right hand and taking 10 in their left. And in addition to that, the same thing holds true for health services, because if you've got a $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 deductible before you get treated for a major illness in a hospital, who's going to get saddled for that? If my son or daughter got hit with that, am I going to say, "Oh, tough luck, you're on your own," or go declare bankruptcy? Of course not. So here again, it's disingenuous what's happening here, and we have to look at the big picture and not everything's interrelated somehow, right? And so we have to look at it in a very holistic kind of way, I believe. Our campaign is getting a lot of good traction, and we're excited about the feedback we're getting. We've got a lot of volunteers stepping up, and every time we have an interaction such as this program, we're picking up more help and more volunteers. So I'm grateful for the opportunity, and we're looking good here, because this is a district that Bernie Sanders won in 2016 during the primary, and I basically identify as a Bernie-crat, and so we're excited about that.
That's great. So if people wanted to volunteer, could they go to your website, billcimbrelo.com?
Yes, there's a form. There's a contact form there, but there's also a volunteer form, and they absolutely can. They can indicate there what kinds of things they'd like to do, and we certainly would love all the help. We've got people phone banking now and canvassing and all that stuff, and I do it, of course, myself, and that's the best way. It's the only way. That's the way Alexandria made it happen in New York. That's we're not gonna win this on dollars. We can't we can't match the incumbent who is taking corporate donations. We're grassroots.
And you're no corporate donations whatsoever.
None whatsoever.
Great. So we just spoke with Bill Cimbrelo. You can go to his website to see more about him and the issues that he cares deeply about at billcimbrelo.com. Bill, thank you again for joining us today. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Amanda, likewise, thank you for the opportunity.
You just listened to another segment by Actify Chat, Communications, Happenings, and Trends. Please like, subscribe, and share. Then head on over to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/ActifyChat to support us. Even $1 a month helps us bring more content out to you. Thank you for listening and keep fighting the good fight, my friends.